Hello, I'm Mike McFalls. I'm the director, or I am the interim director of the Bartlett Center. I'm the director of Passaquan and professor of art. I want to thank you all for being here this evening. I have one last little bit of housekeeping for the art students, the CSU art students. You need to identify yourself as by your last name and then dash Witty for the art convocation credit. So just make sure you, again, you put your last name dash Witty for that art convocation credit. So again, thank you all for being here. We are so delighted. We have our virtual roundtable discussion about music as image and metaphor. This is a collaborative exhibition between the Bartlett Center and the Kentler International Drawing Center. But before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about the Bartlett Center and then introduce our guests here. So the Bartlett Center is an 18,000 square foot interactive gallery space housed in the River Park campus at Columbus State University. The center is a dynamic, creative learning laboratory that is part gallery, part museum, part experimental arts incubator, and part community center. This exhibition, which has been just so lovely to have this last couple months, this exhibition is called Music as Image and Metaphor, and it brings together 41 works by 28 artists from the Kentler Files, and it focuses on the theme of music. The theme of music as image includes works that are directly inspired by or illustrative of sound art, while the image as metaphor theme encompasses a diverse group of works that directly or indirectly reflect the structure or artistic goals of musical composition and improvisation. The exhibition also includes a suite of 1-minute musical responses to each visual work. Some of the collections are also direct and clear, while connections are direct and clear, while others are a little more poetic. But whatever that connection, this exhibition celebrates an ongoing relationship between visual art and music. And like I said, this has been such a great, but also ever-changing exhibition. Living in that space over the last couple of months, your understanding of works change based on these musical compositions, that 1-minute musical compositions that were created. So, but before I go further, I first want to thank our Bartlett Center Board of Advisors and their support for this exhibition. And I also want to thank our sponsors of this exhibition, Kay Broda, Judy Harris, and Janice Watson, for their generosity to make this exhibition happen. It wouldn't have happened without them. So let me introduce our great panel this evening. I'm not going to go into great detail. They are really, they have great reputations and well known in this field, but we just don't have that time to go in great detail about them. But you know them, they're artists, they're curators, they're composers, their reputations precede them, and they're coming to us from Cincinnati, Biloxi, Mississippi, Columbus, Georgia, and Brooklyn, New York. So like I said, I'm not going to go into great detail here. But our first guest here is David Houston. Davis is an art historian, a writer, a curator. Some of his museum experiences include being the co-director and chief curator at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, the director of curatorial fairs at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, and the executive director at the Bo Bartlett Center. He's currently the executive director at the Orr O'Keeffe Museum in Biloxi, Mississippi. Right beside him on my screen, we have Florence Neal. Florence is, did it drop? I'm sorry, did I drop?
Well,
You're
none
still
of us
here.
are.
Well,
Okay.
all
Okay.
of our
None of
videos
us-
on.
All right.
You're with.
Florence is an artist, and Florence is an artist. Her work consists of prints and paintings and drawings and sculptures and installations. She often works in cross-disciplinary. Are we having some technical difficulties?
Yes, David and Hannah need to start their video again.
Yeah, okay, I got it. We got it.
All right, so I keep seeing people come in and sorry when I'm reading it. So Florence is a Columbus native. I'll start over. Her works consist of prints and paintings and drawings and sculptures, installations. She often works in a cross-disciplinary collaborative manner. Her works have been exhibited nationally and internationally, and she has pieces in major collections across the country. Florence is also one of the founders and the executive director and chief curator of the Kentler International Drawing Space. We also have above her on my screen, Michael Kowalski. Michael is a composer and a pianist. He's a pioneer in the field of computer-generated music. He works extensively for, or he wrote extensively for percussion and mixed chamber ensembles before turning full-time to operatic compositions. In 1995, he founded the ensemble, the Post-Industrial Players. Michael's chamber music and electronic works have been performed throughout Europe and Japan in dozens of university venues in the US and Canada. You can't count them all. There's so many of them. We also have Allen Otte. Allen is a professor, a percussionist, and a composer. In the early 70s, Allen was a founding member of the Black Earth Percussion Group, an experimental group that used improvisation as part of many of their concerts with the use of film, electronics, and homemade instruments. He arrived at the University of Cincinnati in 1977, and in 1979 founded the world-renowned ensemble percussion group Cincinnati, which was later inducted into the International Percussion Arts Society Hall of Fame. He has presented his own creative works in concert and guest presentations throughout the US, Europe, and Asia. And finally, our last member on this panel is a friend and a colleague, a professor of art and gallery director here at Columbus State University. In her own artistic pursuits, Hannah creates drawings, sculptures, installation, video pieces. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, such as at the High Museum in Atlanta, the Zuckerman Museum in Kennesaw, the Vargas Museum of Art in the Philippines, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Honolulu, and the list goes on and on and on. Hannah currently has a show, a solo exhibition, Stillness at Poem 88 Gallery in Atlanta. And one thing Hannah pointed out to me yesterday in our conversation before, our pre-tech conversation yesterday was we have Allen, we have Michael and Hannah, all of them graduates from the University of Illinois, which I thought was kind of funny and ironic. So, well, what I'd like to do is get this conversation started and then leave it up to this distinguished panel. They're the ones that put this exhibition together. We have the two curators here. We have two artists here. Florence is a curator and artist in the exhibition. And then we have two composers. And I'd like them to have a dialogue. But I'm going to start this question off for David and Florence. And my question is really, tell us about this project and how it started. What was the genesis of this project? And kind of, if you would please talk about the evolution of this exhibition, because we've all discovered how much this exhibition changed because of COVID. So maybe you could touch upon that. And I'll leave that question to get this panel discussion started with David and Florence.
Well, Florence, thank you all for participating, and Michael and CSU. But Florence had invited me when I was living in New York City to work with her on an exhibition from the Kentler Flatfiles. And the Flatfiles sounds self-evident, but for those of you that have never been there, I'll say a few words about them. The Kentler is an institution of devotion and love, which has been privately sustained for the past 30 years. And the core of the Kentler International Drawing Space is a set of flat files, literally the flat files that architects store their drawings in. And it's probably no mistake that Florence's father is an architect and she's very familiar with flat files. But over the years, she has solicited artists from around the world, literally around the globe. I cannot think of any country, hardly at all, that is not represented here, and has had their work shipped to her building in New York City and stored in these flat files. They're all in a room. So what you can do, any individual, a curator, or just someone that wants to look at them, can go and interact with all of these extraordinary artworks from across the world. What's really unusual for curators is usually you start working with artworks as an image, as a disembodied image on a computer, in a book, in a catalog. And so the experience of going to the back room at the Kentler, working with Florence, and literally physically pulling the files out, handling the artwork, just places you at a different place with the work of art. It's an authentic experience that few people are able to have anymore. So the Kentler is unique in that it is a building, is a physical space, but it's also an assemblage of artworks, a lot of it self-chosen by the artists themselves. Florence also has a hand in shaping the overall direction of it. But it is a community of images unique to the world and unlike any other. And in the front of the space, she regularly organizes exhibitions, both herself and with guest curators from across the world. It's an amazingly democratic space. It's open, it's intuitive, and it's an experience like no other from the point of view of the artist or from the point of view of the curator. So I worked with her on an exhibition called Portrait. The Kentler Flatfiles in 58 works. And we spent a good bit of time pulling out every file and going through every image. And the goal of that show was to create a snapshot of what the Kentler had been for the last 30 years, which is to say, represent each of the media in the flat files, each of the countries, age, gender, race, literally what would be a profile of 30 years of art activities at the Kentler. And so we mounted that show. We had a really nice discussion about the Kentler's history, published a small catalog. So when we were talking about doing another project together, we tossed around several ideas, but one of the dominant things that came out of that first show was the idea that so many of the artworks were related to music, and they were related to music two ways, some of them quite literally, and these are the artworks that are image, but many of them metaphorically. That is to say that they're symbolic of some of the values or the shared vocabulary of music, or they're kind of distantly representative of the way music looks, the way that notation looks. So we, after trying out a couple of ideas, we kind of playfully went through the flat files together, each of us pulling works that resonated with each of us. And then we made a final cut that we both agreed upon, and we had to convince one another what the connection was, and it had to be strong enough that both of us agreed upon it. The original concept before the COVID crisis was for Michael and Allen to come to Columbus and to have a concert with musicians from the Extraordinary School of Music. And as the crisis unfolded, it was quite clear that that was not going to be possible. So as we had a four-way discussion with the two musicians and the two curators, the musicians generously offered to take intellectual time and physical time, review these artworks very carefully to the point that they knew them so well that they could make a 1-minute musical response to each of the visual images split between them. And in doing so, we got to a methodological point of view that really unveiled the premise of the show much better than a live concert would. And that is to say, the premise of this exhibition is that for many, art and music can share an emotional world, a visual world, and even an audible world through a profound sense of feeling. a correspondence of emotion evoked through both sound and sight. And I will say more about that later. But we could have constructed a whole theoretical backdrop for this show, which would have been needless because it started intuitively and it should end intuitively between the viewer, the listener, and the various works of art. And I will just close my comments to say that this should be taken both serious and lighthearted. There's a lot of hard, important work behind here, but it's really about what the viewer and the listener bring themselves in an emotional response to two different worlds, the visual and the audible, with shared responses between graphic artists and musicians. So look at it, enjoy it, use it. And as I've visited it repeatedly, it's been very rewarding because a lot of my takeaway has changed over time. So thank you.
Thank you, David. It's really been great to see if I'm muted. No?
You're not.
Nope, you're good.
Oh. It was really great to work with you on this exhibition. And thank you, Michael McFalls and Bartlett Center for hosting this show. This is really fantastic. And to me, the show just keeps living. It's the most unusual show we've ever had with the Flatfiles. It just keeps teaching, as you say, and the comments from the artists and people all over the world help clarify that. But for those that don't know what the Flatfiles are, here are some of them. And there's over 200 artists in these files. And the work is owned by the artist. We are a nonprofit gallery, and this is our 31st year. So I started realizing I invited, Carter Foster, he was drawings curator of the Whitney, came over. He said, I should know about you when he came to New York. He came over, and in 2006, I invited him to curate a show from the Flatfiles for Kentler. And so we've continued this program, giving the artist opportunity to be seen by professional curators and museum curators, and also vice versa. So I don't want to talk too much about that. We have a great website that has all of the artists on there and their works. And so that's how this show came about. We have in this show, it's kind of interesting, there's, we imposed really what is music on these artworks. And some artists were quite surprised, others weren't. There happened to be about 7 artists that either 4 artists have musical partners, 3 are musicians themselves. Their artworks, there are 22 artworks with musical titles, and there are 2 collaborations with artists and musicians. So I just think it's fantastic what the musicians came up with in this. But I also want to ask, like Hannah, who's in the show and has also had a one-person show at Kentler, but we chose your work and it didn't have a musical title, and just wonder how you feel being in this beautiful piece in the show.
Well, I thank you for having me, and thank you for curating me in this exhibition with some of the most amazing artists and that come out of the Flatfiles. For me, I was actually very surprised, but also not at all. So the piece that I have in the exhibition is an etching, and which I made I think in 2018. And when I did this etching, it was through help with another artist who's a printmaker. His name is Tad Michael, and he was here for a summer residency, and he really introduced me to a new world that I've never done before. And as an artist who creates mark, it's an introduction to another surface. So I was really excited to be working with him. But we were working on this exhibition, well, in this print, we were actually listening to cantatas by Johann Sebastian Bach. And we did this for like weeks because I was I'm a bad printmaker. I don't like rules, and printmakers, they love rules and they love structure. And so I was all over the place, and but there was something about the music that made me focus. And we were talking about this as now that I'm remembering it and going back to it, how important that connection was. And the other thing that I've always thought, I listen to different kinds of music when I'm making art, but there's definitely, and I think David mentioned this earlier, that there are many art forms that uses similar descriptive terms like repetition, drama, syncopation, and balance, rhythm, dialogue. And these are the same things that I use, in my own work to describe it. So definitely, the moment when I heard I was part of the exhibition, it's kind of like this instinctive connection, that I'm glad you and David saw, or I don't know, maybe we're all connected. Isn't that what music does? It connects us all. So.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm also interested in, the continuation of that sort of connection between the drawing and to Allen's interpretation of the work. That there's this, from, working with another collaborator to the piece, and then there's sort of the continuation of kind of these distance connection between language and music. It's very poetic.
Yeah.
Can I jump in and say I'm glad I didn't hear until right now that you were listening to Bach when you made that.
And I love Bach, and but there wasn't really the influence was really external. And, I wasn't thinking about Bach when I was making it, but definitely there was some kind of, where the music just really moves you. And the same thing for dance, just dance. I've always thought dance is so much part of drawing because it creates gestures and visible gestures. And so, I was telling earlier, some of in a lecture earlier, about my connection to the music of my piece, and how you really define a visualization of when I'm listening to the music that you created about my work. I started seeing lines differently. And trying to reimagine the work itself. So I'm so honored.
When I saw the work, it reminded me of a lazy grid of Baroque counterpoint.
Yes, yeah. It's true.
Definitely, yeah.
It's falling apart.
Well, I could show you, Michael. Can I do this?
Sure, please, yes.
Michael. This instrument is called a dufa. It's an Iberian Peninsula medieval frame drum, and of course they fell out of use hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But you see them in all the iconography of medieval Spain, and there's one maker in the Azores now. It's used in Portuguese music, But my interest in playing medieval music, I sought this out. So it's, you know, it's played in a very simple hand drum sort of way. So I think partly the grid, the squareness of your piece made me think, you know, rather than a circular drum or something else, I thought of my medieval adouf.
Yeah.
And what I saw in your work was things that were tightly woven, but then they came apart, things that related very precisely, and then some strand would wander off, and so it would come undone. So the idea of to play something that disintegrated, and then weave would start again, and it would disintegrate, and that's.
And I see even with your motions, Alan, you look like you're also weaving.
I thought of it.
Yeah. Really, I love that connection. And it goes back to movement, a structure of movement. And I see that in Jannika's work as well, you know, who's part of the exhibition, and with her movements and her sculptural work. And really, there's an amazing intrinsic relationship between movement and gestures in drawing. And also in Florence work, it definitely has that.
Well, Kentler has a history of working with artists and music and musicians. And a couple of the works, Morgan O'Hara has spent many, many years doing live transmissions of mainly musicians, but not just musicians. And we have one of her drawings in this show, and she had a wonderful one-person show here. I have to say, Vivian Rambalde Pepe has a drawing there, but she also has a musical piece which was not interpreted, because the visitors are invited to play her these what are they? They're musical cards that are the alphabet, and she worked with the musician Benjamin Vellet. Next, anybody?
Would you like me to share that piece?
Sure.
Yeah. Share that piece.
Because you physically interact with it.
Yeah, give me a second here. Share.
It's a machine, a work of art.
So that's a quick look at it.
And I particularly appreciate that it's a dissonant machine rather than a romantic machine.
Yes.
I'll do it one more time. What do you, Michael?
It could be a consonant machine. It doesn't have to be dissonant. It's just sort of a function of the pattern of the slots on the paper, right? And that's what I find very, very attractive about it. Aside from the fact that it actually is very reminiscent in the sound of a great maverick American composer who lived most of his life in Mexico, Conlon Nancaro, who did tremendous works on player pianos by actually creating the perforations in a piano roll, very much reminiscent of Vivian's piece.
Right.
I think this is a great opportunity to look at some of those works, Michael, and maybe we could some of the sound pieces next to in that PowerPoint.
All right. Well, before I do that, there's sort of a method to the madness here of the selections, and David and Hannah and Florence have already touched on this, and Alan as well. That when Alan and I took on this task in October of creating the musical responses, we both go back sufficiently far that we remember the rough and tumble days of music improvisation and freeform experimentation and interarts projects from the even from the 60s and certainly the 70s and the 80s. And our experience, Alan, jump in and correct me if I misrepresent anything that you think, is that it's very easy to sit and sort of wig out in front of a graphic until you've done it 2 or 3 times, and then it gets sort of stale if you're just sort of playing, the reflections on the wall, or as I actually did in 1970, I turned the phone book in my town into a percussion quartet. Very nice, but cute. We wanted more than that. We wanted something where we would push ourselves off center, push ourselves out of the convenient zone. And we came up with a sort of a rubric, which anyone who's seen the show, either in the gallery at the Bartlett Center or online, will notice that there are these names given to our reactions that basically fall into 5 categories. One is the spontaneous, the unmediated, and that's basically what I've been describing. That's just do what feels right. Don't think about it too much. But then, true to the name of this show, music as image and metaphor, we thought of 2 different kinds of imagistic ways of reacting, and then 2 different, more metaphoric ways. Now, the imagistic would be, obvious one is the soundtrack, following the implied narrative or the mood of the work and creating basically a support for it. The other imagistic, where you're still getting into the piece as an emotional and aesthetic trip, is to find something about it that seems important and develop it. And when I say develop, I basically am talking about the kind of idea that a jazz musician would have done with a tune or a mode. Then you have material and you push. You may end up with something very new and very different, but you started from that seed in the whatever the source was. On the metaphor side, that gets a little fuzzier, maybe a little more abstract. But one way of thinking of abstraction is to think of the piece as the graphic piece is something that someone did with a point of view, with a craft, solving a problem, if you will. Think of that and then go as a musician and make something more or less the same way. In other words, the analogy. Now, this may end up veering off rather more from the mood and the original feeling. The last one is dialogue. Gesture for gesture, respond to the piece, gesture for gesture. Now, the various pieces that we're going to play and show illustrate those various ones. And very conveniently, it's Hannah and Molly Snyder-Fink. The very first 2 pieces in the show at the Bartlett Center are the ones I'm going to cue up for you. Just give me a second while I share my screen and share my screen, which is going to be a little bit crazy, but there it is. And go to my, and I want to share my audio. Show computer sound, very good. Okay, here we go. And we'll start with, there we go. Little signage, and comes up the image and the music. There we have it. I think by the way, for the record, the background noise and conversation is not part of the musical response.
I think, Hannah, you're picking up some resonant sounds behind you.
I am.
Voices.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's why I muted you. I'm sorry. It's you or James. I can't figure out who it is.
So there we have the correspondence, and none of the first one. That was an example of what my starting point. Let's put it this way. These are starting points. These modalities that I talked about was as a soundtrack. And what did I see in that picture of Molly Snyder-Fink? I saw, this is a somewhat dazed, somewhat crazed piano player looming over his or her keyboard. Let's just see what kind of a soundtrack they would produce if they were let loose on the 88s. And that's basically what that was. So that was, soundtrack in the old sense of Alfred Hitchcock and Bernard Herrmann, or not that I'm Bernard Herrmann, but you get the idea. But Alan and Hannah, do you want to say more now that the world has seen the correspondence?
It's not Bach. You're on mute, Hannah.
Well,
I should say that that Michael should have most of the credit for these quite sophisticated ideas of the different ways of responses which he proposed to me, and I think that in the 20 that I made, I accomplished all the different responses in one moment or another. But I must say there were a number of them that for me, unlike Michael, who I think was able to give himself the task aforehand and then find a way to really make that composition in that sort of dialogue with the piece. For me, there were many times when I didn't want to say that I was just making an unmediated subjective response, but I guess I sort of was. I knew what I wanted to do. I saw something, I looked at Hannah's for some time, and that's one that came pretty quickly, that this idea of the weave and the weft and the warp and how my hands would move and ravel and unravel. So there were a number of them. I just did it. And I ended up spending more time thinking about it after the fact. Now, what can I tell Michael? How can I claim that this is a metaphor? I just did what I want, but Michael wants to know if it's a metaphor or an analogy.
Wait. I mea culpa. I have to clarify one thing. It's very important. These strategies, these gambits, were my reason for coming up with something like this was to kick me out of my comfort zone, so that I wouldn't just come up with reactions to each piece that were sort of analogous one to the other. And obviously they overlap, and it's impossible to separate these modes out into 5 threads that stay distinct. No, and you know, and for myself, the challenge was, in some cases, I assigned myself a modality that would really be hard to do, to see if I could pull it off, at least give lip service to what I was doing in terms of the response mode. But Allen, I think that it worked, I think, is what I would say.
Well, they're both monotone, repetitive, but not symmetrical. So they're subtle and asymmetrical in a flat monotone plane, both with the sound and the image.
Yeah, I was very happy.
They were.
I was very happy that we came up with so many different kinds of musics that had so many different kinds of relationships to the visuals.
What's come out of it for me is this new way of seeing and hearing. And I also know, watching Michael work and Allen Otte, how much they looked at these works. And, you know, they didn't necessarily research each artist and everything. They just reacted to what they saw from the computer, sometimes here. But they looked at these works and analyzed them, and it was kind of amazing. And I think that shows in this result. And what was the statement Jeff Glassman wrote, Michael, about looking in time? It sort of gives you another sense. I didn't print it out, but it was a wonderful statement. I'll send it to you. Maybe it's on here.
Actually, I have one of, later I'll read one of Jeff Glassman. This is an old friend of ours, and Allen knows as well. He's out in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and he had a marvelous reading, extensive readings of the experience of watching and listening that we just received yesterday, actually.
I think what he said, and thanks for sharing that with me, Florence. I read that little note by your friend Jeff, and which I thought was really a key to what happened, what transcended within, you know, using the structure. Was he mentioned something, I stopped looking, I started watching. And I think that is a really interesting perspective when you introduce sort of these connection with music. And so, I thought that was really eloquently said, because I think that's what happens, is that it starts to give you more access to stop and start watching, because, you know, there's a time sequence. And more likely he was referring to that, I think, online, because of the relationship between the image and, you know, and he hasn't seen the exhibition in the gallery. But when I've been taking a lot of people up there, kind of touring them around, and I can see them stopping and really, you know, having a different relationship than looking without hearing anything. So I don't know if it's the same for you, Mike, since we can be the only ones who can speak about, you know, the exhibition.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then we have a lot of people going, and Michael, we're going to queue you up again, so get ready, because I think that a lot of people are requesting to see more music and more images. But to add to that, and I think that's a good point. The one thing that's happening in this show is, number one, the way I see those works, those visual works, is changing completely. And the one artist, and this is strange, and it's probably because I'm thinking about it with my own students, I kept thinking about Allen and Michael, and there's a comment that Tom Sachs uses when he's referring to when he recreates a piece. He calls it sympathetic magic, right? And he built he remade the Modrian Broadway Boogie Woogie out of gaffer's tape, right? That was like one of his first sympathetic magic pieces. And I kept thinking, well, these pieces must be changing for Allen and Michael because of their experience writing a piece, right? They're having this genuine experience, different than somebody that might just look at a piece of art. And it changes that piece of art as they're making it. And I think Allen has talked about this a little bit as well, but that's the one thing that changes for me when I'm in that space. I keep thinking about these two composers and how they have changed my perception of the work, and maybe how that work changed for them as they were making it. And you know, and I guess this is what David and Florence are saying. They want this. There's this constant dialogue between the visual arts and the audio arts and music and art and visual arts. So, well, Michael, are you ready? Because we have some requests from people to see some more.
All right. Well, two more coming up then. Second of our three pairs. This is the first one is a very beautiful print, which really must be seen in person. And I've fortunately seen Takuji Hamanaka's piece, which is a marvelous grid. It's a print, but you'd never know it. It shimmers as if it were almost iridescent. And that one is my approach to doing the music there was the analog. I really tried to produce a grid of shimmering sounds, no two of which quite read alike. Then the next one by Simon Lewandowski is a very exuberant woodcut, and I'm not going to say anything about that except when I applied an old piece of electro funk dance music of mine to this, I thought, oh, let it rip. I'm not thinking about this anymore. It works. So those are the two that you'll see now as soon as I share my screen. And share my audio. Okay.
You're now a Zoom expert, Michael.
Not yet.
Well, when I chose this piece, I could hear Terry Riley's music, and that's not far from it. Funk is universal.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a lot of positive response on that funk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, everybody, many students here are saying they like this one. This one's funky.
That's what my brother-in-law says too, and that's what my brothers say.
Well, the image is funky and the music's funky, and they're analogous, and so it's
Well-
it's an easy leap.
There's also something interesting at Kentler now. Maybe, Michael, you could just show that web page, Kentler web
Yeah,
page.
give me a second there.
No problem, man. Thanks,
Yeah.
Sean. So there's no
I think that
sound.
James,
Yeah, James, can you turn yours off? I'll mute him.
James, it's.
I mute him.
okay.
Sorry. Now I'll share my computer.
Thank you.
Give me a second.
So all of the artworks and the sound is available on the Kentler webpage for the exhibition there at Music as Image and Metaphor. So underneath all of those, but I also want to, wait before you go there, you see the flat files. Here at Kentler, we have flat files with some of the music notations by Michael and some of the sketches that he used to analyze the pieces, and also some of the percussion setups that Allen made. There's the sketch for the piece you just heard. You could enlarge that a bit. You can just press on the image and should go up. So you can see how there's a lot in there. It's not musical notation, but it means something to him. As my great aunt would say, means more to him than it does to anybody else. But anyway.
She's probably right.
I'm having trouble.
It's the right, there's a right X on the right-hand corner
Yeah,
somewhere.
I'm gonna have to.
Oh, you
it's
have to go
stuck.
out. Okay, just
Yeah,
go
I'll have
back.
to go out.
No, just
I'll
go
go back to
Just-
this one.
Okay,
Just give me a
Oh,
second.
boy.
I'll go. There we go.
all right. So we won't do that anymore. Just scroll down.
Is there a particular piece you want me to go
Yeah,
to, or you?
Just keep going to the bottom so we can show some of Allen's percussion setup.
Yeah, there's a piece of that. This is a good one.
There we are. Alan, would you like to say something about that?
I didn't have a broken banjo, but I did have a broken skin head on a very old drum, and I had a guitar. The shovel, the rusty shovel, of course, any self-respecting percussionist would have a rusty shovel at hand. I had pretty much everything, and I live out in the woods, so I'm certainly not a hunter, but I find antlers laying around, and they make a sound, of course. So as most percussionists, yeah, you know, I'll pick up an antler and throw it in a box and think, you know, someday I'll probably care about the sound of this thing. And sure enough, I look at this crazy thing by Michael Chen, and there's a
Philip Chen.
It's Philip Chen, and there's
Yeah.
you know, there's the piece of a shovel and a piece of an antler and a piece of sword. I didn't have a sword, so a rusty saw was going to have to do. And then on all of our concert tours all of these years, you know, we always have time to go into junk shops and antique shops. And I think this sort of vintage shortwave radio here, I was thinking about it. I think that's from Hannibal, Missouri, from a concert down there. But when I looked at the Chen piece, there's this, of course, this this distance, this mystical sort of distance to the whole thing. So so a shortwave radio, trying to find something in the ether, distant in the ether, provided the background for me to then just, again, physically traverse each item in the picture. And that's as simple as what I did, actually.
Well, if I could make a comment, Alan doesn't know this, but I've been listening to him since I was 16 years old, and Neal ordered the first Black Earth Percussion Ensemble record, which I still have. But the sense of experimentation, the sense of openness, and the freedom that both the visual global conglomerate here and the musician's response, I think is just a testament to the talent and commitment that's out there outside the commercialized art world. And there are a lot of people that do this for reasons far beyond money and fame. And I think this exhibition extends that wonderful experimental tradition that a lot of us came up with into a couple of different generations. So the talent assembled here is just kind of overwhelming as we sit and reflect on it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe
Is there another piece here?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
Where would you
Alan,
like me to go, Florence?
What does Alan have another piece you want to talk about in this?
Actually, I think the one that you've just arrived at the screen here, the Park piece, and you see the instrument that I used. I think Michael is going to play that, but I also have that sitting right here. I could show you.
Did you make that instrument? It's very curious.
I didn't make it, but it's makeable. It's called a water phone. And there are very few artisans who make these things. And this cavity here, you just pour a little water in it. So I've got some water sloshing around. And then these brass rods are welded here. So what happens is when you bow the rod, and then you swirl the water. So for the image, the visual image, it also had very specific, discrete points, which is why I thought of this instrument, that it could give me both the obviously ethereal floating, but it could give me very discrete, different points. And I could do both. I could keep one layer going while I did the other layer. It's just called the
Michael, did you want to?
Yeah, yes, I can cue up the two. And this is interesting. This will be two Gay Park pieces. One response that I did and one response that Alan did. And the pieces are the visuals are very much sibling pieces. Both of these modalities were the other modality that I didn't talk about so far was a dialogue, this gesture for gesture. And I think what's fascinating here is starting with two pieces that are graphically have a lot in common to hear the difference between, you know, what Alan did and what I did. So let me cue those up for you right now.
Kathy Fussell, I saw your comment there. You're right. St. Ohm would have loved the water phone, no doubt.
Sorry here, folks. I lost my cueing. Just a second while I
Take your time. We can, no
Bring
worries.
them up. I'm bringing them up. There they are. Okay.
There they are.
Okay. Here we go. So this first one is mine. There we go.
Good comments.
Yeah, many. So Florence, do you want to talk about any particular pieces in this exhibition that I can bring up for you?
Well, let's go to the exhibition page if we could. The website.
Okay, I'll share the screen.
They're kind of.
There we go. You want me to go to this page right here?
Yes, please.
Because I think this is a really interesting way to interact with the whole show for viewers that can't make it to the Bartlett Center, especially.
Yeah, let's go to Beth Casper, the first one, to the audio underneath. This is a series of 4 lino cuts. They're pretty large. So if you'll go back, now you take the red arrow, go to the corner and see the red arrow close out, and click on the audio button underneath.
No, it's not gonna work.
I just want to show
doesn't
them.
work.
I just want to show them what it is. So there you will see what basically what Michael was playing, and so anyone can listen to any of these pieces, and you'll get more of the sound. It's pretty good sound actually. So each piece has the music piece, so you can go back. This is a series of 4 prints, and I think Michael did 2 and Allen did 2, I think. Each of these works are pretty amazing. You know, we have a drawing. Well, we have these 3 beautiful scrolls by Keiko Hara, that the blue and they're in the center of your exhibition space. They were done for, it's called Topophilia Ma and Key Memory, and they were part of an amazing installation at Kentler in 2016. So again, if you research Keiko, you'll see a link to the exhibition and get to see where these pieces came from. They're two-sided. They're mokuhanga, which is a Japanese printmaking technique on, and it's collage and stencil, and they're gorgeous. And when I first heard the music pieces, I was hearing them and seeing, I don't know about anybody else, but seeing an interpretation of the piece that I hadn't seen before. And I thought Michael, one of them, captured the other side of the piece in sound. I was really amazed at that. You can go down to Yuji Konatovsky, the K. All of these pieces are incredible, really. And of course, they don't do it justice for size and for duplicating the real piece. The other thing that's interesting is they have created a PowerPoint that's on view in the gallery, and it is a timeline of perhaps how you would view the work. And so it makes an interesting sound piece. There is a space between it, but we are also playing that at Kentler Gallery now. So we're connected to your space with this sound. That drawing that you had up, Yuji Konatovsky, was done with pencil, and it's a 15-foot drawing, 7 foot by 15 foot by Czech artist Yuji Konatovsky. And he brought that over. We have several. This is not in a flat file. This is not here. It's in a big tube, which we sent there. We have several of his works. He had a one-person show here. There are 20 artists in this current show that have had a one-person show at Kentler, which is kind of amazing. You know, go down to Morgan O'Hara here. This is well, that's next to that one. Whoop. Or you could go to Janica Pierna to the, okay, go to music. That's good.
Is that what you want?
Yeah.
That's
So
Janica?
Janica is, this is a beautiful piece. It's mylar, and it's actually flat. And then, and it's a drawing on mylar, and then it's cut, and she hasn't cut it to the edges. So I sent a, you know, a flat cardboard and had to show them how to install this. And actually I took a video of Janica one day here installing it. So it's installed with magnets, and it's just beautiful, graceful piece about movement. A lot of her work is performative and using the body. And again, she did a really stunning installation here with drawing and dance at her opening. So it's a three-dimensional drawing. So you can click out of that one, the red. And let's go to, there's so many. Let's go up to Morgan O'Hara and talk about that. So interesting. She had a show here. I met her through Yuji Konatovsky, I think, right, Morgan? There you go. And this is a drawing, she calls them live transmissions, movement of the hands, in this case of musicians and technicians. You might want to talk about this piece, Michael. You saw it.
This is tearing down the set and the electronics after a Merce Cunningham dance troupe performance of Rainforest with music by David Tudor. And it's rather nice. For one thing, I saw one of those David Tudor Cunningham performances of Rainforest, and then it actually inspired some of the electronics that are in one of the other pieces here that I did. Nishijima's piece. And Alan, I think you paired this with absolutely phenomenally evocative historic recording that I think is probably worth giving a listen to if we have the time to do that.
Well, her
I
drawing,
think we do.
she's doing a portrait of people's hands in the motion that they're in. So,
Well, I don't think these were hands. I think this is a bird's eye view of the entire stage and backstage and orchestra pit as people were scurrying about, packing boxes, taking down scenery, taking down lights, et cetera, et cetera. This is the
so it's the
stage crew.
movement. It's
This
the,
is
yeah, the
yeah,
movement.
this is the stage crew piece.
But it's still, and then she puts the names of the people. It's incredible. They're portraits of energy, of movement. It's wonderful.
Should we listen one more time, Michael, and then take questions here? Michael, Alan,
Sure.
Florence, David, Pat.
There's lots of music, so I could cue up this one, or I could cue up the suite of the 4 Beth Casper pieces, which have 2 by Kowalski and 2 by Otte. That would be kind of interesting. Or the Keiko Harris triplet, which could run 3 different views of those remarkable hangings. Why do we
People probably want to, maybe we could hear 2 of that, Steve, or you play, but people probably want to ask questions, and they're probably having dinner now.
Well, I'm going to share my screen, and I'll pick out what we're going to pick out.
We've only lost about 10 people, so they're either not there or they're watching intently
Okay.
and listening. I should say listening as well.
No, wait a minute. Stop. Wait a minute. Sorry about this. No. Wait a minute. I need to reassess what I'm doing here in my PowerPoint. I don't want that. Thank you. Stop. Okay. Now I have to go back in there. Okay. Now I will share. Now we shall do that again. Sorry. Okay, let's go to Beth. If I can remember where Beth is. There's Beth. So we have a suite of 4. We could listen to 2 of them. Yeah. Okay, here's 2. One by yours truly, 1 by Alan. Okay.
It's amazing how long a minute sounds.
You got people dancing in their seats. I'm telling you, Michael.
Well, those pieces were by Beth Casper, and they were called Dancing with Darcy Thompson. So there you go. There's 2 more.
There are 4 of them, and they're hung as a grid. And when you see them in the gallery, they really look like a variation on a theme, like a musical theme.
Yeah, I'm particularly
So,
happy with the difference between what Alan gets in terms of making that gorgeous array of rhythmic attacks on very resonant and round images, and what I did with the rather more simple and maybe a little more Brugist elaboration to the same theme graphically, but in a much more simple way. And that's what led me back to my portfolio of old funk pieces.
Do we see any questions in the chat that we would like to?
yeah, I was going to say, I think at this point we're at about an hour and a half, and I think we should. And this, by the way, I just want to say, as a Zoom, this was one of the more difficult Zooms I've been participating in a lot as a professor lately. But to try to explain the complexity of this exhibition, the density, the kind of diversity of sound and actually visual imagery, it's very difficult through a Zoom. I want to make sure that everybody knows that this exhibition's up till March 20th. Those of you in Columbus should come and see it in person. It's a total different experience. Although, and if you can't, please scroll around on the Kentler File website. I think the Drawing Center website there is an amazing tool. But we should probably open this up for discussion, for questions. We've had a few, and as they come in, if somebody has any kind of question for these artists, for Hannah, Florence, and David, and Florence for about the curation of this exhibition, and Michael and Alan about their kind of experiences with the sound component. So see if anyone has any questions here, Alan. Just a lot of thank you. Somebody wants to produce this as a TV special on Netflix, they said. Thank you.
Michael.
Yes, I'm waiting for questions. I'm all answers here. Tentative answers, anyway.
Wonderful
Maybe
visuals. Thank you.
Maybe we could play one of the Brune pieces and talk a little bit about that. That was really important.
There's to come in. So, what was your criteria in the pairing? In pairing music was one of them.
What was the criteria? What were the criteria for pairing music? Alan, do you want to start, or shall I?
Specifically with Herbert's things, are we asking?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought of his comment that one of the ways that he has made these things was a bit of a socio-political view of how the programs worked, where every point, instead of only following its own path, checked in with other points as they all went forward on their own paths. So this was meant to be on his part, a socio kind of comment about checking in with everybody else before you make your next step. So these webs of things are created because the points are checking in before they move forward. So this was where my notion of making something that where you find a certain point, and that point will check in with another point.
I think he's talking about web. Are you talking about web or
Web.
which one? That one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. That the way I did it was to make certain points, all the different points were moving at different rates of speed. So you would have something going at 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, at this, and then some other point was moving faster, dot, 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 and they would make a polyrhythm against one another.
Well, curatorially, this was the starting point for the entire show, because these are hanging on the wall at the Kentler, some of them. And they're both image and metaphor because they're quite literal. But then the way that the computer printer interfaced with the computer at the time that interfaced with sound, they were also very metaphoric. So they're a period piece. Historically, they're important, but they're poetic and engaging at the same time. And this was the first body of work that gave us the music idea.
And I would add to that, that this notion that Alan and I toyed with of the analog is very much the artistic child of directions that Herbert Brun used to put in his graphic scores, computer graphic scores that look very much like that, a sequence called Mutatis Mutandis. And they were compositions for interpreters. And he says that these could be done by any composer, meaning a dancer, a writer, a poet, a musician, whatever, and any performative discipline. And that notion of getting into the head, if you will, of the maker of the image, and then going and doing likewise in your medium is a direct descendant from Herbert Brun ideas.
Well, if you look at Yanis Xenakis and that whole period of transition from structure to music to image, these works are historically important and stand alongside anyone using experimental music and images at the time.
Yes.
So you have another question. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep going, Mike.
Oh, no, I was just going to say Xenakis and Brun, in many ways, were working with equal intensity, but I would say a different motivational aesthetic anyway. That I mean, I met both of them. I knew Herbert quite well. They were both rather flinty characters, I'll say that.
Different cultures by far.
But both scarred by the World War II 40s experience. And I think that informed a lot of their later aesthetics as well.
That's the objectivity and the hard edge reality of it all.
Someone asked in the chat how Michael and I decided who would take which of the two. And as I'm not sure, the way I remember it or prefer to remember it, is that we did in fact independently go through and choose what we would like to do, and we agreed we would then meet in a phone conversation with that, and just see where we overlapped and which ones we each preferred. And there were certain ones that Michael, having chosen certain ones, meant that I was going to get others, and I said, "Oh, please don't make me do that one." Could you please take? And in every case, he graciously took one that I just didn't know what in the world I would do with. But I don't think there was too much bartering with it. I think we, we just agreed. Anytime there were multiples of artists, we would each take one. Take some of them. Our dear friend Richard Howe had two pieces in the show, so perfect. We each got to do one of them.
So what did you say? There was a little uncertainty, I think, from all of us, is what are the artists going to think of this interpretation?
And yes, can I just jump
please.
in right now
Yes.
and answer that concern? Well, concern in the back of my mind, Alan, you could give your own response here, but I think that the key notion was these pieces of music are not critiques of the artwork. They are not analyses of the artwork
Right.
as to quality, originality, any of that stuff. They are passionately involved responses, but not in the line of a critique. Good, bad, indifferent. That didn't come in at all.
Yeah, I think they're along the lines, you approached it along the lines as the artwork was created. You created another piece that's analogous.
Oh yeah, well, it depended, of course, on the piece. If it was an analogy, then you followed the analogy. Now, it gets a little more difficult, and I think this is where, Alan, you offloaded a few pieces to me that were difficult, were the pieces that were figurative or in some ways narrative. And there, of course, there's a lot of implication. There's a semantic there. There's content, there's references to figures, people, situations. And there, it's pretty hard to just go off, on some tangent that has nothing to do with nothing, And so those were challenges for me. I will readily admit that. And the most literal, most storytelling image was the Robin Holder's image of the jazz musicians called Five Spot, which is a very representational, very beautifully simplified, elegant rendition of a jazz combo and what seems to be a singer. And there, well, it's literally about music from the get-go. Now this is a problem. What to do there? And I don't want to bias our listeners and viewers according to my interpretation of the piece, but I would invite everyone to, when you look at that one, keep an open mind, because I was trying to enter into a dialogue with what I thought was the underlying story of the picture, but that might not be anyone else's underlying story of the picture.
Well, the Five Spot was a club, very famous in the 50s, where Thelonious Monk famously recorded a really important disc.
Yeah.
So it's quite literal, a place,
right,
a representation, and then your response.
I thought that one I thought was a real aesthetic challenge for this Polish American gringo from Buffalo. But
you're pretty funky though.
Well, thank you. But the other one that was equally difficult was Hugh Williams' very stormy piece, abstraction, but it's named Gospel Singer. And there again, I was on the horns of a possible, not a dilemma, but a problem where I felt to be honest, I needed to tread carefully, not lightly, but carefully.
Well, he's a Southerner from Alabama, and it's not your aesthetic.
Right. And so I had to do something that I'm afraid I Yankeefied it because I ended up bringing in the sheaves, which could easily been heard in Connecticut as it was anywhere else in the United States.
Well, the whole point is not to have everything consistent and seamless, and the gaps between our selections for the show and what the musicians did in the work really invites, I think, a lot of interpretations from viewers.
Yeah.
So,
well, the great, you're going to close, but I wanted to say that David Houston is also a musician and played drums and he was a young person and knows a lot about music. So this was really a blast with you, David.
Well,
that's another story. That's another life.
Our collaborations are fun and hopefully fruitful for others. And thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the CSU and the sponsors, but especially all of the artists and musicians, because everyone's doing this from the heart and it shows.
I also wanted to say, Kentler, it's really important to me that the artists speak for their work here. And we've posted on Instagram and Facebook all of the artists we called the featured artists, and they had a chance to say something about their work. Somehow I'll eventually put that on the website for people that don't have that. And also we have a show with 10 of the artists that are in the show. It's up now at Kentler. It's black and white, called Variations in Black and White, Music as Image and Metaphor. And that's up till March 20th too.
Thank you, Florence and David. A remarkable job. We wouldn't be here we're here because of you too. Thank you. Brilliant.
Well, we're here because of the artists.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions. There's no way we're going to get to them. They're now all coming in, but we will have it all. We do have a record of this, and we will share this with Michael, Allen, Florence, David, and you all could then respond to these individuals. We can post this later. It's a fabulous show. I still even have questions. I'll end with one question and then we'll leave. But the one thing that we didn't get into very much here, and somebody kind of brought this up, is that these were going to be performances. How do you feel about these now that they're not performed? And some of them even sound like a MIDI track or something like that. Is that a finished piece? Are you okay with that? And how you think it would have changed if it was performed live at the Bartlett Center versus the way it is now? Because I personally enjoy the experience by myself. In fact, I put my headphones on and listen to the Kentler site while I walk around, because I can do that. And there's something really nice about that experience by myself in that space versus this kind of performative experience. But I didn't have that, so I don't know what that's like. So maybe Michael and Allen can close on that, and then I'll have some closing remarks here.
The concert that Michael and I had thought through, nearly 2 years ago already, would have been completely different. Would have played something by Herbert Bruin, and Michael would have played some of his own music, but it would not have been really anything like what we came up with. So we've all been talking about this over the last year, how this how the change in society, there's not going to be a normal to go back to, and that for all the hardships that everybody has endured, and some people much more than others, there have been some really beautiful things that have been engendered by this crisis, and the music of that concert would have been nothing like what we actually came up with now, and I couldn't be happier to have had a good kick in the pants to do something to do something new. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, yes, agreed with all of that, and it's definitely a radically different experience from a 75-minute concert, which would have presumably been accompanied by some remarks, maybe even a panel discussion live that would have sort of drawn connections. But the one-to-one correspondences were not part of that original plan. When this idea came up in October, and Al and Florence and David all said, yeah, that's good. That's a good idea. Let's do it. About a week or two after the initial exuberance, Allen, you can say whether this happened to you or not, but I thought to myself, oh heavens, what have I backed myself into here? This is a lot of stuff to do in a couple months.
But it makes it more intuitive, and it makes it more direct.
Yeah, I mean, I think the connections are much tighter to the show than it would have been a kind of a parallelism if it had been the concert. There wouldn't have been this knitting together. So I'm very happy with that whole side of it. And there also has to be one other nod here. I don't know whether Richard Howe is online now, but Richard Howe, who's in the show with two graphic pieces, graphite pieces. Long ago, 20 years ago to be exact, Richard and I were having a conversation on the way back from Cincinnati, Ohio, where we had seen Allen. And he suggested to me, I was writing operas there. I was beginning my third opera. And he said, you know what you should do? You should do 61-minute operas or 62-minute operas, something like that. That's very, very short, very short. And okay, you know, this was one of those ideas that sounded neat, but well, I was doing other things. And here it comes bobbing up to the surface again, 18, 19, 20 years later. And there you got it. Sorry?
40 more to go.
Yeah, right. Yes, yes. So
Well, I think I'm gonna go ahead, Michael. I'm sorry.
No, I said just that I'm happy with the way that turned out. Yes.
Yeah, as somebody that stepped into this, you know, as this was developing, I was really pleased with the solution. I thought it was a clever solution, and I think it's an amazing experience for the viewer in a way that a concert, I don't think, the concert is so ephemeral. I constantly have an experience with these pieces, and that's something that I really am enjoying, to be honest. It changes every day. As somebody that goes in that center at least every day, it's always changing, and that's the amazing part of it. I'm going to end this discussion for now. I want to say thank you to everybody. I thought Hannah, thank you, Florence, thank you, David, thank you, Allen and Michael. Really, it was beautiful to see this. Thank you all for dealing with us during those technical issues in the beginning. I appreciate you all coming. We had about 80 people at one point were in there, 80 something people. Please to the Bo Bartlett Center in Columbus and see this exhibition. You definitely should. And if you're up in Brooklyn, go see it at the Flatfiles. And definitely, if you can't check that out, the best alternative to those exhibitions is seeing it really on Florence's site or the Kentler Flatfiles site, and having a kind of exchange with that work. But I appreciate everybody coming today. And again, this show is up to March 20th. Thank you. Thank you.
There's the golf.
Good night. I'll
Okay.
give you a good night looking at sunset on the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh,
All
excellent.
right.
Wonderful. Oh,
Too much.
Yeah.
fabulous. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks. Great job, you all.
Bravo.
It's such an
Bravo.
honor, Alan and Michael. Definitely, and I hope this is just the beginning. Thanks.
Oh, here. Yes, definitely. Okay.
Everybody.
Ciao, everybody.
I don't want to leave. Ciao, ciao.
Okay. Bye-bye.